Caroline County Board of Supervisors meeting to order. I'm going to ask Mr. Jeff Black if he would lead us in the invocation. If you would please stand.
Dear God, we come here today asking for your guidance, asking for your strength, asking you to bless every one of us, each and every one of us here today, that you may give us the knowledge and the strength to make the decisions that we see fit and best for Caroline County. We ask this through your name. Amen.
Amen. Please stay standing for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Board members present this evening is Mr. Jeff Black, representing the Western Carolina District, Mr. Calvin Taylor, representing the Port Royal District, Mr. Reginald Underwood, representing the Reeder Church District, Mr. Jeff Seeley, representing the Bowling Green District, Mr. Floyd Thomas, representing the Mattaponi District, and I'm Wayne Akers, and I represent the Madison District. Amendments to the agenda?
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. We'd like to remove consent agenda item A, approval of minutes.
Is there opposition to removing item A? All right. It will be moved from the consent agenda. Is that it? Opening board comments, Mr. Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have several, so I'll just first of all, I would like to thank, there's a lot of thank yous that I have to say tonight. First of all, I had the opportunity over the past month to do the ride-along program that is available to all the citizens of Caroline County. And I had a chance to ride along with the Sheriff's Department, the fire, and the rescue out of Ladysmith. And I'd like to thank all of them. It really is an eye-opener when you have an opportunity to ride along with each one of those departments and see what they do on a daily basis. The professionalism, the courtesy that they extended to me was amazing, and I gained a lot of knowledge out of it, and I really, really appreciate to all of those departments the opportunity to be able to ride along with you. So thank you there. I would also like to thank Mr. Fincham. Mr. Fincham took Mr. Famera and myself and Mr. Cully around the county to areas that weren't necessarily in our district that we weren't so familiar with. And he is a wealth of knowledge that we're very fortunate to have in Caroline County, so thank you there. Also, this past week, members of the administration, myself, had an opportunity to tour the North Anna Nuclear Power Plant in Louisa. And it really is an amazing facility, and we're hoping that we can economically get some more out of them. So that was a great tour. And finally, I would like to thank the Sands Anderson for their support and the board for their support on the Aqua Virginia case that took place about a month ago now. A lot of people spoke out very passionately about their concerns with the strain that the water company puts on them. So I thought it was very successful, and so that's it. So thank you.
Mr. Taylor?
I don't have any at this time.
Mr. Underwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a couple. I thank Mr. Cully and the staff for meeting on June 25th with myself and people from the Dawn Housing Project to try to remedy some of those situations that we talked about earlier and heard from our constituents. I was very pleased with the direction that we're heading, so I certainly want to extend, again, a thank you to Mr. Cully and the staff. Second, I know we voted to change the meeting to the 31st of July for our second meeting. There's a conflict in my schedule, and I understand that Mr. Cully has already advertised that meeting, so we cannot change back. So I won't make a motion, but I will not be able to attend the meeting on the 31st due to a conflict in my schedule. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Seeley?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one comment. I'd like to remind everybody that the Caroline County Agricultural Fair starts this Wednesday through Saturday. A lot of new buildings, a lot of new attractions are going to be there, and I would encourage everybody to come, check out and support the county fair and all the folks that work really hard to bring that to us. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The one I'd like to bring up is our property maintenance program. I've been working with Mr. Fincham on several requests that I've got from citizens throughout the district. I think one was in Sparta Road, which is actually Mr. Seeley's district now, but we decided last year not to continue that program due to what it's caused, but I think now we're at a point where there are health and safety concerns. I've got at least 2 in close proximity to this building where the neighbors have reported snakes and other animals coming out of there. So I don't know. I think we're in better shape financially than we thought, so maybe we should put some funding in just to do 1 or 2 per district, if that's the case. I'm not sure how the rest of the board feels, but I've had requests for 3 myself and 1 in Mr. Seeley's district, I think, maybe 1 in yours. So I don't know if I'm the property maintenance guy, but we need to somehow bring that back.
Okay. My only question would be is you shared with Mr. Fincham the locations. Can we get an estimate as to how much we're talking about? Maybe you already have done that.
Mr. Chairman, I won't bring the entire list to the board, but I think we could go through and identify the properties, 10, 12, and get cost estimates on those properties to have them cleaned up. In most cases, all the properties are in foreclosure and owned by the banks or are in the process and of foreclosure, and the different property owners don't claim ownership. So we can get you a list of a couple of properties, the most egregious properties, at least in our eyes, in each district, and bring that back to the board for your meeting on the 31st.
Could you bring back more than a couple of those? What may be grievous in your eyes may not be in mine, and what's in mine may not be in yours. One that I have a tremendous problem with is at the corner of Ladysmith Road and Route 1.
Yes, sir.
That, they put up signs in the windows, and keep out and things of that nature. We need to do something with that. It's an eyesore there at that intersection, and that is the commercial, for that side of the county, between Carmel Church and Ladysmith, that is the commercial hub. And so we need to do something to get that cleaned up or torn down or whatever needs to be done.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, thank you. Anything
That
else,
was
Mr.
it.
Thomas?
That's it, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate
All right.
it.
Right. All right, now I have no opening comments. Presentations, presentation of VDOT's I-95 tolling proposal. Good to have you this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Mike Estes with VDOT, and I appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes with you and provide an overview of where we are tentatively with our proposal to potentially, I should say, toll I-95. And I do think it's important for this board to be aware of the plans of where they stand right now. And I'll try to go through this fairly quickly if I can and leave some time for some questions.
Sure.
Again, Mr. Chairman, if I need to do something here to get it up on the screen. Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and start. That's okay with you? Should have a paper copy in front of you. And what I want to talk about again is our proposal to potentially toll I-95. And the first couple of slides you can read are really focused in about the corridor itself. And we're talking
Joe's trying to catch it. See where the cord is in.
Need a dongle?
Won't be any good till that light comes on.
Well, we've got the PowerPoint. I
Yes.
just want to go through it.
Want to roll through it?
Yeah.
All right, let's go. So The first couple slides talk about the significance of 95 in the Commonwealth. I don't think I need to talk to this board about that. But what we're trying to do is set the stage for what you'll hear me talk about in a few minutes of a pilot program that the federal government has that allows 3 states to toll what had been a free interstate. And one of those requirements is to lay out the need, the significance of the corridor, and the need on the corridor, and basically lay out the case that Virginia cannot fund or come close to funding that need identified on the corridor. So that's the genesis and the background for the first couple slides. And on slide 4, that $9.6 billion number is, again, a huge number of identified need based on a series of projects that have been identified either through the planning district commissions, MPOs, local governments, or statewide transportation plans. And we'll go back to that number here in a minute. But by no means is VDOT under the idea that tolling revenue will be able to fund that gap. What we talk about in the next slide is we see tolling revenue potentially as being an incremental boost to help start to address modestly some of the needs on 95. So you can see in that dark blue, which is the larger piece of pie on the right, that's really our capital program right now. And the lighter blue is our operations and maintenance program at today's levels. The thought would be that tolling would be a modest piece of the overall pie to address the 95 corridor as a whole. This is a little bit of background on the tolling pilot program that I mentioned from the federal government. Thank you. Thank you. And here you can see basically last September, Federal Highway granted our what we call the conditional provisional approval, and something we've talked about with the Planning District Commission a couple of times. Really puts us in a position with the states of North Carolina and Missouri. They hold a slot for Virginia in this pilot program. And then we have to go forward with applying formally with a formal application. And we'll talk about our schedule to do that later this summer in a minute. Since that approval back in September, we put together, Federal Highway asked us to put together a vision for the corridor, and we did that over the holidays, and then in February went out with our initial kickoff with the metropolitan planning organizations, planning district commissions, and local governments, and have been working fairly aggressively with them to make sure everyone is aware of our initial plans on the tolling proposal. We're also looking to reach out to our business stakeholders. You can see them there, and we'll talk a little bit about public meetings that we're planning for later this year as well. This is just a list of some of those meetings I was mentioning. This is by no means a comprehensive list, but some of the larger meetings that we've had, and that I believe Mr. Black and Mr. Taylor were at least a couple of those with GWRC, where we had the opportunity to talk a little bit about the program in the Fredericksburg area. So the 2 questions that we always get initially, of course, is what kind of toll rates are we talking about and where? And this is our attempt at trying to demonstrate the type of toll rate that you would need if you were to try to simply, or not simply, but try to focus on that $9.6 billion gap. What kind of rate would you need to charge on that full, almost 200-mile corridor? You can see the numbers there, and I won't go into details unless you would have questions, but the numbers per mile, again, on around a 200-mile corridor would be extraordinary fees. And so based on that, we had stepped back and said we want to take a modest step forward on tolling, and we looked at something. Market in the East Coast area is around 15 cents or less, around 12 cents per mile. So we looked at a range from 2 cents to 15 cents per mile. Again, looking at the overall corridor, and we'll talk about some of those scenarios in a minute. And then what we're looking forward, carrying forward in our application I mentioned would be something around the 2 cents per mile rate. And we'll talk specifics on toll rates next. I won't go through all the different scenarios that we evaluated, but this is somewhat of a menu. We looked at anything from one location to what, item E there is a closed system where we're looking at potentially tolling between every interchange. And you'll see our proposal that we're looking to move forward with is A1, which is, again, a modest step into the tolling realm of one gantry, one tolling location in both directions. And our current proposal is that we would erect that in the Sussex County area south of Petersburg. These are just some factors that I won't spend a great deal of time on, but when we looked at where to locate the toll facilities, we obviously looked at the local communities, impacts to local business, impacts to local roads, for folks who may want to divert around the toll and use parallel facilities to, for lack of a better word, skirt the toll. And that came in, all these items came into play as we moved forward with analyzing which scenario to move forward with. So here's the location in Sussex County. You can see it's south of Petersburg, north of Emporia. It's 20-couple miles north of the North Carolina line. And it's basically, again, our one location that we're proposing to move forward with to apply formally to the federal government later this summer. And just some interesting information about traffic in that area. It is probably, or it is one of the lowest traffic volume areas along the corridor, and so it would have one of the least amount of impacts to the traveling public as we modestly step into the tolling realm on what had been a free interstate. And a lot of the traffic, as you'll see that third bullet down, 48% of that traffic, if they're heading north, they're continuing at least on to mile marker 100 here in Caroline. And so it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of the blend and the characteristic of the traffic that we're seeing at that part of the state. I want to spend just a minute on this slide. This breaks down the toll rate a little bit more detail. You'll see that our initial proposal is $4 for a passenger vehicle. That's our 2-axle reference there. And with a 5-axle vehicle or a typical 18-wheeler would be 3 times that rate, or $12. Those would be in each direction. Tolls would be collected going both northbound and southbound. We are looking at potentially doing cash collection as an option as well. We are moving forward with all electronic collection for mainline, but we are analyzing the cost of what it would incur us to build cash collection parallel to 95. You can see the other items up there. The one interesting thing I would like to point out when we looked at this concept is, if you're familiar with that part of Virginia south of Petersburg, the good part is there's a good local road parallels 95 for the local community on 301. The negative side to that, I would say, would be that it's a good alternative route for long trips that want to skirt the toll as well. So one tactic that we had looked at and we're analyzing a little further is potentially tolling the ramps on the preceding interchanges as you approach that mainline toll gantry. So you would get basically charged to get off the interstate the 2 interchanges before, and charged to get back on the interstate the 2 interchanges after. And that's what you see in those blue arrows in the sketch on the right. We talk about revenue. We talked about a huge number of need on 95, and you've heard me say the word modest quite a bit. And this scenario A1 with one location, we estimate will bring in about 35 to 40 million a year gross in the first 3 to 6 years. You can see what the other scenarios brought in. And when we look at tolling in one location, when we looked at a variety of scenarios, we obviously spent a lot of time with local governments and MPOs and the PDCs on the types of projects they'd like to see funded toll revenue. But we felt with one location south of Petersburg, our initial focus with the toll revenue would be Richmond South. So you can see examples of what we think could be funded that aren't funded today with current revenue if tolling were to move forward. So those example projects under the safety and mobility and system maintenance represent what could be funded over a 6-year period with net revenue from the tolling collection. So you can see some of the examples. For example, the 95, 85, 460 interchange is that upgrade's an $80 million project. That's the #1 priority for the MPO in the Tri-Cities area that this toll revenue could help fund or fund and complete. So real quick, Mr. Chairman, my last slide just kind of wraps up on schedule and where we are. You can kind of see where we've been since the beginning of the calendar year. We've been recently in the month of June and spilling over into July doing a lot of extensive outreach. I've had the opportunity to speak with a lot of your peers in other localities around the Commonwealth on the corridor. And we hope to submit that formal application later this summer. Depending on the federal reaction to our proposal, we hope to take this out to public meetings in the fall. And then, again, depending on the input that we receive from those citizen meetings, we would refine our proposal and try to move forward with what we have to do is execute a tolling agreement with the federal government for them to actually allow us to toll 95. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's my brief overview, and I'd love to entertain some dialogue and questions from the board.
Thank you, Mr. Estes. Mr. Black, do you have any questions, comments?
None.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes, I do. I guess one of the concerns, and I don't know if it's gotten to this point yet, but there's obviously a lot of controversy over the tolling and the issues that tolling brings about. My concern is that there is almost or very little funding for things that we do at the local level, like unpaved roads and secondary roads and those kinds of things. And I do understand the fact that the tolling is not going to address that. But my question is there a possibility that if tolling were enacted, then the Department of Transportation would have more funds to address local concerns? And is that something that's been talked about?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Taylor, that's a very good question, a tough question on how this would help, down to the local level, local streets, local roads. With this proposal right here, the funds that are generated from the tolling revenue would have to be used on Interstate 95. And I think you've acknowledged that kind of in your statement. Theoretically, years down the road, if we're able to address a lot of the need on 95, there may be an opportunity that we have additional funds that could then feed back into local needs. But I wouldn't want to leave you with an expectation that that's anything that I would see with the current proposal that would happen in the near future. The revenue that we're talking about generating with this tolling proposal is again, I guess I keep using the word modest, but it's an incremental step forward, but by no means is it coming close to addressing the need on 95. So I don't think this tolling proposal is really going to get to addressing the need that I've heard at VDOT in my previous job working with local governments for the last 8 years on the need to get back to a secondary road program or a rural rustic road program.
Okay. There's also been talk about construction costs for tolling being up towards $50 million.
Yes.
Which probably would take just about most of the funds, over the first year. So how do you address that? I mean, it seems as though you're creating an additional bill as opposed to generating revenue to take care of issues that are already a concern.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Taylor, it is true that when you're looking at building the gantries on the main line, especially if you're looking at cash collection, there's a hefty upfront capital cost to implementation, to getting us to having the tolls in place. Even with that, it will show a net revenue increase over time. And what we have assumed with some of the numbers you saw, so I showed gross and I didn't show a net number. We have planned to upfront some of the capital costs, and then our assumption is we could pay that back over a couple of years' time and still show a net increase, especially over that first 3 to 6 years. And still with that, it's even though there's an upfront cost, it will show, again, an incremental benefit on the funding side.
Okay, and I have other concerns as well, but for right now, I'll just move on and see if other board members have questions.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Underwood?
Yes, sir. Based on your presentation, you said that the location in Sussex was one of the lower traffic.
Yes, sir.
And I would venture to say that Caroline County is probably one of the higher traffic.
Because
you've got a division there of people going 85, 95. So I would, but most of them are traveling 95 south.
I think
so.
Sorry.
So in terms of congestion, I think there's a real possibility that we could have a major issue with congestion here in Caroline County. Would you agree?
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, what I would say to that is absolutely, as you go 95 north from North Carolina, not exactly like a linear transition, but the traffic will increase incrementally the further north you go, as you're aware, as you correctly stated. And with that, I mean, we did not jump into this tolling proposal with revenue generation as the #1 criteria that we were analyzing. Because if we wanted to do that, we would put it in the most heavily traveled area on 95.
Right, and then I'm going anywhere. That's right. And that's what we want to try to prevent.
And Mr. Chairman, what I would add to that is what we're trying to put together from a corridor-wide program is recognizing if we get the permission to move forward with one location, and we would be able to spend that revenue basically Richmond south, then that theoretically frees up revenue that we would have been spending in that area on the capital side that we could then apply north of Richmond where the capacity needs are the greatest. So that's somewhat of our approach right now, sir.
Right, and I appreciate what you're saying, but the benefit to Caroline County, I don't hear much benefit to Caroline County or the citizenry who will now have to pay to get on and off coming home and going to work. As you know, this is a bedroom community for many folks who travel up and down the 95 corridor. So now you're talking about spending $8 a day going to and from work with a citizenry that does not have a lot of money from the beginning.
Well, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Underwood, if I could address that, I should clarify, again, the current proposal we're looking at is one location south of Petersburg, so there wouldn't be one that would affect the majority of your commuters. I would assume they're either heading south to Richmond, a majority, or north to the D.C. area. I would say that one of the reasons when Mr. Culley and I spoke about presenting to the board, I think it's important is if, I don't want to say I quickly went over some of the scenarios, but I'm sure this board is aware one of the scenarios we looked at was that 2-location scenario, where we had one in Sussex and one around mile marker 100 in Caroline County. And that is not our proposal to move that forward at this time. But one of the discussions that we've had is that we're unsure as to what the reaction will be from the federal government on our proposal. So we may have to revisit some of this as well after we turn in our application. So I think it is very good for this board to be fully aware and educated of some of the other scenarios that are out there.
So that's between Carmel Church and Kingston. The toughest. Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Seeley?
I guess I have one question I want to follow up to. You said that Tennessee and one other state are also in the slots to actually make application at the same time. Or is it North Carolina? So we don't know what the model of one tolling station is really going to fly, or if they're looking for multiple. Do we have any indication from the federal side of this, whether what they're looking for in terms of a formula for toll booths?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Seeley, that's a great question, one we're anxiously awaiting to kind of see what the answer is going to be. I would say Virginia is in the front of this on an application standpoint. Missouri is the other state besides North Carolina. They've kind of stalled out on the project that they were working on. They got this tentative approval several years ago, and they haven't picked that up to move it forward recently. North Carolina is in a similar place that we are right now. But I believe that they're going to be, I'm predicting that Virginia's going to have our application in sooner than North Carolina. So we're kind of blazing the trail to some extent in this pilot program, sir.
One last question. Are we locked into only 95? Could you do 95 and 85, or is it one application, one road?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Seeley, the federal law that we're pursuing under this pilot program is one facility in the state. So we have to pick the interstate. So we don't have the flexibility to say or make the case that 85 and 95 work in combination of one another. And there are other tolling programs that we can participate in, but it involves a little bit different approach. Specifically, you have to name the specific type of capacity you're adding to the interstate, and it has to be that kind of large capacity improvement like a tunnel, addition of a tunnel. Or it has to be something like congestion mitigation type programs like what we're doing north of Garrisonville Road on the express lanes, bringing the HOV and the high occupancy tolling south. So we're trying to look at all those different variations, and Virginia's really, for lack of better words, trying to take advantage of the programs that are potentially out there that could incrementally bring additional revenue.
Thank you.
Mr. Thomas?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Estes, doing well today?
So far.
Good. I'm easy, don't worry about it. Just a couple of questions. Looking at it, and I know you're just trying to do a proposal, you're just trying to get some ideas. To me, just looking at it, the most equitable one is if everybody paid for the miles they drove. And I was trying to figure out what would be a good analogy, and the Jersey Turnpike was something that I thought of, because you get a ticket when you come on, you pay when you get off, regardless of where you are. And I knew it's 129 miles, and I think the toll is like $13, so it's in the 10-cent range, which is kind of like what you have.
I failed to mention that there's a slide in here that I didn't have in the slide deck up on the screen that I added, because I've been getting some.
Oh, you added it to the.
It's on your handout.
The handout one?
I apologize about that, Mr. Thomas. It's on my page 7 at the bottom.
Page 7, you compared to the Jersey Turnpike?
Yes, sir. If you see the third one down in that table to the right, you'll see the
12 cents, yeah.
The 12. It's about a 12 cent per mile. I don't have the mileage on it there. I have to do the math in my head.
Oh, trust me, I know the mileage.
Yes, sir. It costs about almost $14 to travel that.
Yeah.
From a cash perspective.
Yeah, okay, that's about, I couldn't remember the exact toll, so that's about where we would be. Is that, and I know you're in the early stages, is that where the Commonwealth actually intends to go with federal approval?
Well, I think, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Thomas, at the bottom of that chart, you'll see the proposed Virginia toll at $4 in one location. If you, in our facility.
Yeah, but this is just a test right now. Right?
That would be our initial proposal, that would be the rate. So we are not looking at a 12-cent per mile rate.
But when you come back here in 5 years, you're going to say, well, now we got 4 tolls on 95. I mean, realistically, we're just opening the door.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Thomas, I think it's a great point, and when I talk about, I use the word modest step into tolling, I usually get that next question, well then, what's next down the road if you get one location approved? Yeah. And our assumption with the federal program is we would, if we were to be successful, get approval for one location, and we chose to go with 2 or 3 or a closed system like the Turnpike, we would have to go back through a similar process we're going through now with dialogue with local governments, PDCs, and go through a similar application again. We don't interpret it that we get approval for one location and then Virginia has the authority to just impose tolls wherever we want on 95.
Well, I'm kind of a numbers guy, and I know after 1 comes 2. So, I mean, that's the reality. Let's be serious and be honest. We would come to, I think my number was, we would get $1 billion in 25 years based on that total, right? Your estimate?
Yes, sir.
We the Commonwealth. No, we the Commonwealth. I'm a resident, so the Commonwealth would get $1 billion, but we need 9.6.
Absolutely.
So, to be honest, we're not going to stop at 1 if this turns out to be successful, because we got to close that $9.6 billion gap. So, my point originally is that the most equitable model would be something like the Jersey Turnpike. And that's the only thing I'm trying to say. The other thing is, what happens in the case of the Richmond and Petersburg lawsuit? Remember when 295 went around them and they sued to have their tolls removed? Are you prepared for anything like that from Colonial Heights or whoever else is in the proposed area?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Thomas, we haven't gotten to that point yet. There are obviously some concerns that the elected boards from Emporia, Greensville, and Sussex County, where the proposed location looks to be, where I believe they're talking amongst their own boards and councils as to what action they may or may pursue, but we haven't heard anything formally.
Okay, which I guess we're still planning, so they won't show you your hand yet. Okay, and the last thing is we have in our packet a resolution from the Hanover County Board
in opposition to any tolls? Anybody else, any other local governments that you've seen said that?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Thomas, Hanover is the first county to formally adopt a resolution in opposition. I did receive a resolution from Greensville County this week, so they've formally adopted a resolution in opposition. And I do fully expect to see one from Emporia, but I haven't seen one yet.
Okay. That's kind of a question that I'm sure we're going to see later. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Stacey's, we talked earlier about the I-95-85 split. Is there anything that allows you to say going in one direction you can have it in Sussex County and the other direction have it further north so that you can pick up that split but not have it in Caroline County? And that is my major concern, to be quite honest with you, is the fact that, just as Mr. Underwood indicated earlier, is the fact that if we come to Caroline County, if one is put in Caroline County from further discussions and further issues with the federal government, that really puts a burden on the citizens of Caroline County, which are not as able to pay these tolls as some other localities are. Just as I feel about Sussex, to be quite honest with you. I mean, that is not a real affluent neighborhood and a real affluent county either. So I think to me, you're putting a burden on those people that you aren't putting on the rest of the people in the state. And I think that would happen in Caroline County, and that's my major concern, is the fact that, if we could, personally, as far as I'm concerned, if we could get some type of assurance that, no, Caroline County would not be considered for tolls, then I would be more inclined to say, okay, we need money in the state in order to repair the bridges, repair the roads, expand the roads, and things of that nature. But having said that, I personally think the General Assembly has really, again, passed the buck on to someone else, and they can sit back and say, we didn't raise taxes in order to improve the roads, but in essence they did on the people that travel that road. So it's. I'm sorry. It's one. Yeah, well, I'm not sure it's a penalty or a tax, but anyway, whichever, it is additional cost to the people that travel, local people that travel those roads. But back to my first question about the location of the tolls.
Mr. Chairman, if I could take a minute and possibly if you could look at page 5, I do think this is an important point that you raise. I did go through the scenarios very quickly, but the bottom of page 5, A1 is the proposal that we're looking to move forward with, and that's both directions. A2 was exactly what you just mentioned. It was for example, it was a northbound toll only in Sussex County and a southbound toll only in Caroline. And we looked at the mile marker 100 area as our potential 2 locations. So we did specifically look at that, and Caroline County was specifically identified as a potential location for that scenario A2 and A3. So I just want to make sure I am clear that was something that we were looking to. And basically, if I could step back, and one of the things when we were looking at locations, I mentioned the express lanes and the HOT network. That's currently, we're working on a contract to hopefully have that by the end of this year to bring the HOV and the HOT down to Garrisonville Road. The next, I guess, extension of that, of the HOV, it's part of that overall program that was kind of done as a package, went down to Massaponax. So we've done the environmental work, and you're probably familiar with some of that already. So what we did is, for actual physical locations, we did kind of let that project come to 126 and keep that whole, and didn't intermix tolling on the HOV or HOT with this general purpose concept that we're looking at under this program. So physical locations is what I'm getting at. We looked at 126 South to kind of give you an idea of kind of how we landed on 100 area. And the last thing, Mr. Chairman, not to belabor that point, but some of the things we're continuing to look at that I think is important for communities to be aware of and for local elected officials to know. For example, in Sussex County, we would agree with you wholeheartedly on the demographics and the issue that we could have on impact we could have on local traffic. And we are looking at commuter incentives or frequent user programs or other programs that we can put in place that can target the local community, so they're not, those who are traveling to and from work on a daily basis have at least a reduced